Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 1 forwards cheat sheet. If you've never seen the cheat sheet series before, it's effectively a tier list guide to FPL, looking at every position, every price point, almost tiering players based on that sort of price point and their value. So I think with the forward position, one of the interesting things, of course, looking into this season is we come from the context of last season where the forwards completely dominated the game, and a lot of this was spurred on by the bonus changes. Now, some of the bonus changes have, I think, impacted some forwards, right? Penalty taking forwards have gotten a nerf just implicitly because of the penalty taken bonus nerfs, which aren't significant, but they can take you away from more situations where, let's say, if a forward only scored one penalty within the game, did nothing else within the match, it's actually quite unlikely now that they actually get triple bonus. Whereas last season, I think it was actually extremely likely as a forward that they would benefit in that context. Generally speaking, I think forwards will still do very well this season. I do think that FPL have changed the price points a little bit around those. So what do I mean by that? I'm just saying that I think FPL have recognized that they last year very much boosted the forwards a lot. And they've tapered the price points now to adjust for that, in my opinion, which I think has been a really good step up. Players like Isak, for example, have been moved up in price, and I think that's fair. On top of that, we have all these sort of additional impacts in terms of like the C-bits, the C-Brits as well. The C-Brits impact the midfielders, the C-bits impact the defenders. That just gives you artificially more points for the midfielders and defenders. Unfortunately, of course, even though forwards are capable of getting these, 2 C-Brit points per match, there aren't many forwards who will do this or will achieve this successfully. So I think that's the big context shift in terms of boosting a little bit in terms of the midfield. Like if you think about a Bruno, for example, or even some of your midfielders, there are now more situations where they can get those C-Brits, right? These Bournemouth attackers or the NDIs of the world, who are still really good at open play on paper, for what they are within the context of their team, they will still get decent chances of getting C-Brit and those additional 2 points per game. Whereas now the forwards, I would say, are still the least likely of all positions to be able to sort of accumulate those additional 2 points per match. So that's the opening context. And to support a lot of the data around the video, we've used Fantasy Football Hub. They're a partner of the channel. And ultimately, a lot of the advanced data tools can be found on their website as well. If you're interested in some of the sort of preseason offerings that they actually have a Rate Your Team AI draft tool, which you can find in the link in the description below. All you have to do is actually upload a screenshot of your draft, whether it's from your mobile phone or actually if you're working on the web, just taking a screenshot, uploading it into the link in the description below. You can just get your team rated by the AI. Alternatively, they have a great offering generally for all their suites and tools, which is to win your mini league or get your money back with T's and C's involved. So once again, have a look at the link in the description to get access to Fantasy Football Hub, where you'll also find a lot of advanced data and model projections and points. So jumping into the forwards cheat sheet, I think, the 4.5 position is just a sea of nothing. I put Barnes here because he'll probably play a few minutes of football. I guess, Junior Krupi could do the same thing too. I don't really care about this position, neither should you at this moment in time. The next position that actually matters, I think, is the 5.5 million position. Now, Muniz isn't here, and I haven't featured the Fulham forward of choice because Fulham's opening run of games aren't great, but there are rumors, of course, that Muniz could move towards a team like Leeds, for example. But, Pirro is someone who's most likely, as things stand, I don't see Leeds necessarily close towards another forward in the news. I know they've been rumored with multiple. They just failed to secure Paixão from Feyenoord, a Brazilian winger who's actually played really well. I wonder if the target that they're actually going for is going to be another winger instead, as opposed to a forward, which then actually boosts the sort of value of Pirro. But there's an asterisk here for a very clear reason. Beto is just above that. I think Beto's opening run of games is actually quite sweet. And, he's not on penalties, but he was actually the default center forward for last season. I think with Barry from Villarreal signing, it's most likely that Beto could lose minutes. So I think Beto is not, an amazing pick to start the season, just off the basis that he won't be on penalties and also he could lose minutes quite quickly. But for now, I think he's the starting forward of the team, and I think he's a really reasonable pick. And Pirro could actually be even better if we think that Leeds aren't going to sign anyone. But I think one of the things that a lot of people need to consider is that even though Game Week 1 will start, the transfer window is not closed. So you might be invested into someone like Pirro, and suddenly he's maybe second choice forward by Game Week 5, Game Week 6. So you never really know within that context. So I wouldn't dare say that any of these picks are green picks. I just don't think they don't really have that sort of value point locked down within the draft. In the next tier, in the 6 million tier, I think Igor Thiago from Brentford makes a lot of sense. Now, I suppose there should be an asterisk here, but I haven't put one. The reason being because it seems like Wisa is very much on his way out of the club. It seems like he's also not involved within the preseason. So, of course, there's a fitness piece there regardless. And then it just seems like generally he wants to leave no matter what because he's refusing to train. So I think that's a clear boost towards Thiago just being a great all-around pick. You've now taken penalty takers outside of the team as well. He should most likely be on penalties if Brentford are to get penalties. I know a lot of people have a general consensus opinion, which is that, yes, of course, Brentford have lost all their best players across the board. They have gained Kelleher, of course, and they've also, unfortunately, lost their defensive sort of mid archetype in Norgard. But I still think there's a basis or base level expectation here, and Brentford must be sort of spending money to get more players into the squad. Now, of course, a lot of the sort of squad building was done last season when Thiago was actually out injured, but for what the fixtures are, for what this means at this sort of price point, I think Thiago is just a really good pick. Fulkrug is someone who I don't see necessarily getting full minutes within a match. I think he's someone who can be subbed off quite early. He's also not on penalties, or maybe he's on penalties, but Paquetá is also someone who has a claim to it as well, and that kind of reduces the value of Fulkrug to me a little bit. The underlying numbers last season weren't exceptional by any means, and I think part of the reason is just simply he just didn't play enough minutes coming off from a pretty serious injury that started the season really poorly for him. With Barry, of course, the other Everton forward, I have him here, but I wouldn't start the season with him at all. He's pretty much in a void for the time being. I would only really consider him if you're, interested in, for example, investing into that Everton position later down the line. There's going to be some value there, definitely, just because at that sort of price point, no sort of team at that sort of bracket, I think, has a starting forward potentially at 5.56. So it's not a bad price point whatsoever to be in. In the 6.5 tier, I think you start to have a lot of value. And in my opinion, a lot of forward drafts are made here within this sort of price point. Strand Larson is someone who we expect to be on penalties. Now, he's not guaranteed to be on penalties. Neither are Wolves guaranteed to get a single penalty this season. But the key point, I think, is that he is the main man of the team. He is the talisman. He scored a lot of goals in open play last season and definitely did prove himself to be a Premier League worthy striker. The general football played under Pereira is much better. Are Wolves projected to do really well this season? No, that's the honest truth. But their opening run of games is really, really sweet. And I think Strand Larson at least is a nailed player. And there aren't issues, like I suppose, with the Knicks player here in Welbeck. There is fragility concerns, I think, with Welbeck, right? The ability to play multiple matches within a week, or even, unfortunately, back-to-back weeks where there's 1 week of rest. That was something that I think a lot of Welbeck owners suffered from last season. Like, the amount of times we thought Welbeck was nailed, and then suddenly he actually had a little bit of a niggle or an injury, and suddenly João Pedro, who was exiled from the team, is playing. That happened quite a few times within the season, especially as Brighton sort of lost their form, but also picked up their form in spurts. The key thing for Welbeck, though, is that he is someone we expect to be on penalties. We expect him to also have a lot of minutes played with João Pedro leaving the squad. That kind of creates a vacuum in two positions for that team, and Welbeck is one of the players who is expected to fill the void. So generally, when you look at last season and when João Pedro was not playing, for example, we pretty much had Welbeck as a 90-minute man. Sometimes he can still get subbed off early, but I think that sort of threat is also slightly being reduced with João Pedro leaving, and he should be on penalties. Evan Nilsson's the sort of next pick here. I don't think the underlying stats of any forwards so far have been extremely brilliant. Like when you look at a lot of the players leading up to this price point here, outside of Evan Nilsson, like players like Beto, small sample size, I'd have to be honest. With Pirro, it's a different league. It's a lower quality league. With Barry, it's the same thing as well. As much as I love La Liga, I have to say that. Whereas the other players, I think, have really proven numbers, right? And under a good bar of minutes. So that's why I still really like Strand Larson and Welbeck. And that's why even if someone is to look at the underlying stats, I think a little bit of context should be applied to that too. Not to mention minutes kind of skew things. Like, for example, Fulkrug just simply didn't play enough football for like that 0.25 NPXG to really mean too much per 90. So that's something I'll mention too. As far as Evan Nilsson, though, he had really good numbers when it came to NPXG. And part of it, I suppose, is, he will get added value if Kluivert somehow gets sold and he gets a move elsewhere, but it seems like he will be staying for the time being. I don't see news necessarily connecting him with an immediate move elsewhere, but that would give Evan Nilsson penalties. Otherwise, as a non-penalty taking forward, I think Evan Nilsson does a really good job anyways of racking up a lot of XG and just being a really good high-value pick. He might even be one of the forwards who actually could get Seabrit points. Not saying that this is very realistic. I haven't spent much time even talking about Seabrits compared to, let's say, the midfield position. Like, we're not looking for hustlers here. and Seabrits. We're just still looking for goals scored. Evan Nilsson should be a good route towards that, even though Bournemouth's opening run is rather tough. In the next bracket, though, I think a lot of people, whilst they will be spending money on maybe a 6.5, a 6 million, or even a 7 million forward, it's very likely that their second forward, or maybe their third forward, comes at this sort of price point at 7.5, where I just think you're spoiled for choice. The option that I like the most is definitely Solanke. The season-long goal tallies for Solanke seem exceptional, right? They're closer towards the level of Watkins, and you can see the price gap between Solanke and Watkins. And Solanke is a far tier above everyone else. The big thing, I suppose, is under Tottenham, unfortunately. He did succumb to a lot of injuries last season, whereas previously under Bournemouth, another sort of manager that you would think works his players really hard. And also, I remember Solanke playing through multiple injuries in that season as well. But Solanke just simply wasn't able to play up the same sort of minutes tally last season for whatever reason. Hopefully, that's not some sort of continuation of something serious long term. But I think he has all the sort of tools to someone to have an absolutely stellar season, not only under the change in manager, but just generally speaking, penalties as well being added on to Son potentially leaving, and Son being heavily linked towards LAFC just suggests to me anyways that Son's minutes this season won't be anything that would really sort of spell a dent towards Solanke's projections as a top goal scoring forward. As far as Wood, I just think he has a really clean run of games. You can see that he did overperform a lot last season. This is literally almost doubling, I guess, your expected performance. Wood is not someone who has spent his entire career doubling his expected performance. That was an aberration of a season. Not in the sense that I think it was lucky, but just, it was overperformance, and it tends to happen, but you wouldn't bet on it happening at the exact scale it happened last season. So whilst I think Wood is actually a very solid and good opening pick, hence why he's also a green pick, I don't think he's actually, for example, let's say better than a Solanke, and that could be a hot take. João Pedro, Mateta, I just think that their minutes aren't perfect. João Pedro, the underlying stats last season, I think, are a bit of a misnomer. I tend to think that the numbers were a little bit weird because Brighton were weird, right? Brighton were such an up and down team. He was playing a mixture of different positions, a few games out on the left, sometimes playing at the 10, sometimes playing center forward, but then not having the sort of support in behind. I think under Chelsea, generally, from what I've seen, he's looked absolutely brilliant. And there is some sort of partnership there, definitely, with, like, let's say Cole Palmer, for example. So I think João Pedro, the only thing that sort of hampers his expectations is just the understanding that other players will get minutes, not even including Jackson in the pecking order. It's just simply, does the lab get 25, 30 minutes a game? I think he does. Do Chelsea play with two forwards? Generally, not really, unless they're trying to chase games. And will Chelsea spend a lot of time chasing games? I don't think so. So that's kind of my thoughts on João Pedro. I think the limited minutes sort of knock him down a tier. Mateta is actually a really healthy and strong pick to start the season. You'd have to imagine he still has some sort of lick of pen share, but I think Eze still has that up until he leaves the team. But Mateta would actually indirectly benefit, I think, from that pen share aspect from Eze. One thing I will say is, closing towards the end of the season, Mateta's minutes did taper off a lot. I think he probably ran into a pretty poor period of form after the horrific injury suffered in the FA Cup. And we saw Nketiah play a lot more minutes towards the end. So is that going to continue itself at the start of the season? Potentially, I think. And that's not a huge sign that's positive for Mateta, which is why I prefer the other options. But you're spoiled for choice in this tier. And I think just by living in the 7.5 tier itself, you're going to have an indirect benefit anyways, right? If you start with Solanke, you get Burnley away. For whatever reason, you're not happy with a tier. How easy is it to move towards a João Pedro? How easy is it to move to someone else? I think it's immediately obvious that this is a really good tier to live in. And if you're even, let's say, ignoring a Watkins or a Gyökeres in a tier below, that's fine, in my opinion. I don't think you need a draft necessarily that has Watkins. Watkins has amazing fixtures to start the season, and that's not going to change, right? The fixtures are just that good. But all I'm saying is you don't necessarily need to even have that position. I think just having 7.5 and 6.5 million forwards, and if you have enough confidence in the midfield and the defense that you've actually owned, I don't think you can be particularly let down by sort of missing on the forward positions. And then obviously there's a huge gap anyways between the 9 million type forwards and then the price point of an Isak or a price point of a Haaland. So you'll still need 2 free transfers anyways to sort of move into those types of players. Hence why, as I say, I don't think it's 100% necessary to live in the 9 million and the 7.5 and the 6.5 million price point. You can kind of choose based on your draft, right? All drafts have concessions, and I think equally when I talk about just the game as well, when you think about attackers, like the same argument is in place for the midfielders. Like, not everyone has that 9 million Bruno spot or the Wirtz spot in their team, or a Saka spot for a third midfielder potentially. So it's okay. These are all really good forwards. So moving on, I think Bowen definitely still deserves to be a green pick, if only just because the opening fixtures are actually quite nice for him. He definitely does not benefit whatsoever from this sort of change, right? To unfortunately being put as a forward. He did play a lot of striker, especially under Potter. And just over the last few seasons, I think it has made sense generally to have Bowen as a forward. But he is unfortunately, I think, hampered by it. I think he's a little bit overpriced. I could be wrong, but I'm just looking at the season-long goal tallies for someone like Bowen, and they're not as strong as some of the other forwards that we have, even at cheaper price points. So I think he's a little bit overpriced for the season-long aspect of things. But is he overpriced for the start of the season? Not necessarily, right? When West Ham actually have a pretty good run of games, and he suits very well for a game week 1 type team and a bench boost. Watkins, however, just has stellar games. I think if you want to go with Watkins, there is nothing wrong with it. It makes a lot of sense. I'm not going to argue against it. He's a perfect swap towards Gyökeres. Yes, he's right there. Is he essential? I wouldn't say so, but is he one of the best picks to consider to start from game week 1? Yeah. And there's no denying that. With Gyökeres, I think the biggest thing for him is just that sort of dampener from Arteta's quotes. Not that Arteta is some sort of honest truth teller, but there must be some truth to Gyökeres not, being fully physically fit. Havertz probably has an edge against him in that aspect. And I think there's still going to be minutes rotation, right? If you hear just across the board, listening to the likes of Rice, for example, speak about the team and the added depth, or Arteta talk about it, it's clear that they've tried to build a squad that will rotate. Whether we see that much rotation is interesting, because I still think that Arteta is very hesitant on it. He tends to like playing his main players as much as possible. But I think that's going to have a small impact maybe at the start with Gyökeres. And if we're wrong about Gyökeres, right, if his minutes are perfect, if he's on suddenly penalties, which is another sort of big dilemma. Like right now, I would only project him to maybe have 30-40% pen share, because I think, there's the pity penalties that Arsenal give, 5 to 10%. Let's say Havertz hasn't scored a goal in a millennium, so let's give him a penalty here and there. Odegaard as well, he's definitely deserving of a pity penalty, even though he scored one in the preseason. And then Saka, he himself is most likely going to want to keep penalties. But I'm sure he can be a selfless person. Like if Saka misses, then suddenly the pecking order changes. I'm just not going to start I'm not going to start in game week 1 and say that Gyökeres is on penalties. Should he be on penalties as people were making rational decisions? Most probably. But yeah, I'm not going to bet that he's on penalties from the jump. But Arteta's comments are positive. And the sort of betting markets have generally projected a really good goal scoring tally for the likes of Gyökeres, right? It's just about when do we bring the type of player like Gyökeres in? And potentially you could start the season with him, right? Game week 2, you have such a good game. Like I'll be pretty sad to miss out on Arsenal versus Leeds at home, but those are the kind of sacrifices you make in FPL, and they're fine, because most of the time you're picking an alternative option that is just as good, and Watkins is that, if not better, at the start of the season. As far as Isak and Haaland, I think Isak just has a gigantic asterisk to the extent where I'm not even sure what to say on Isak. I guess as a Liverpool player, I think he's still well priced. Is he on penalties? No. So I think that takes away a lot from his goals within the season. Is he likely to play less minutes as a Liverpool player? I actually think, frankly, yes. Ekitike, I guess, can play a little bit on the left as well, but is he always going to be playing alongside Isak? No. So I can kind of see maybe a bit of rotation between those two players if Isak moves. And if Isak doesn't move, well, things change. But then Newcastle's opening run of fixtures isn't particularly good anyway. So Isak, for me, would still be a yellow pick. And then Haaland, I think, is perfectly fine to start the season with. I don't think there's necessarily much to say in terms of, is it a really bad decision to suddenly go Haaland over Salah? I don't think there's much in it. Just looking at the sort of market projected tallies at the start of the season, obviously, Haaland is a little bit more goals tilted, Salah a little bit more assist tilted. Salah's a midfielder, so he gets additional points. It's quite close looking at the expected points just purely on goals and assists and projected data like that, even from some models that can even help us out and sort of answer that question. Haaland is cheaper at the end of the day. Is there a better rotation in terms of the captaincies by going for Haaland over Salah? I don't think so necessarily. So that's something you might want to consider. But it's also a question of, if you choose to spend that sort of money on Haaland, I guess you always have the flexibility to move down in the forward position, but you will find it very hard to move into Salah. And it's a vice versa thing as well. I don't think a lot of people are living within the Haaland plus Salah drafts, and some people will. But I think the key thing this season is the opening games for Man City are probably better than Liverpool's from an attacking perspective, and you might want to sort of just bank on that to start things off if you are sort of an extremely risk-seeking person and you're comfortable with taking on, what is going to be basically 180, 170% Salah effective ownership almost week to week. So that's kind of it for the forwards. Thank you guys so much for watching the forwards cheat sheet. Let me know if I've missed anyone out. I think one thing I'll say is that there's a couple teams clearly on the market potentially for a forward if they find the right one. Leeds is one of those that I've mentioned. Brentford arguably could still be looking for more depth. I can't imagine that they have enough right now if Wisa is on the outs. And then across the board, I guess even a team like Brighton long term would be looking for a forward, but that's not really going to impact the immediate situation. So that's it for the cheat sheet. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon with more content. Take care and goodbye.